I'm Sai, and today we'll be talking about RFID technology. This is based on research done, focused on improving the security of these tools, and adapted for a presentation about cybersecurity technology. I want to start by asking, do you know what this thing is? It's actually called The Thing, and it was a gift from Russia to the US ambassador around 1945. It was a piece of spying equipment where the listener was hidden inside of the seal. What was key is it was a passive device that needed electromagnetic energy from an outside source to become active. As a result, it wasn't easily detectable since it wasn't always on, per se. The reason I bring it up is it's a predecessor of modern RFID, and while RFID technology has expanded to a variety of use cases nowadays, security has always had a unique link with RFID. Now, RFID, it actually stands for radio frequency identification, and the technology is a pretty broad term, and there's a large range of frequencies it can operate in, from 3 kHz to 3000 GHz. So people tend to categorize it in three main bands: low frequency, high frequency, and ultra high frequency. Low frequency typically operates on the 125 kHz and 134 kHz frequencies, and for this presentation, we'll mostly talk about low frequency. So I want to talk a little bit about RFID. We're studying it because RFID has become used for a variety of real-world use cases, way past the original goals of the technology, mostly because of convenience purposes. These include situations like access control systems, parking systems, and membership cards to badge into places. However, this opens up the risk of security vulnerabilities. When doing this research, we were actually originally interested in the fact that hobbyist tools for using RFID technology have become popular and have hit mass market. These include tools like Proxmark 3 RDV4, which is around $80, and Flipper Zero, which is around $200, and these tend to be pretty expensive, but they include a lot more features, and we believe the price for these tools will decrease in the future. Another key point is when doing research around this area, we wanted to actively do something that was done safely. So this threw out stuff like studying jamming, because the use and sale of devices supporting this is prohibited by FCC for public safety. Rightfully so. Instead, we also wanted to throw out attacks focused on relay attacks, which are an interesting way of extending the reach of RFID attacks, extending the range that they're feasible. So the main problem is actually that attackers can clone RFID tags and act as valid users. For existing solutions, we tended to be able to classify them in two main approaches. One is a prevention kind of approach, where the goal is to make it so attackers can't really clone these tags. However, this is difficult since most general cards provide minimal cryptographic features, and therefore it's pretty possible to make fully identical copies by the attacker. And it's hard to make full prevention against these sort of cloning attacks. Instead, security areas that needed this protection tended to move to NFC and high-frequency RFID for applications that need this guarantee. However, these tags tend to be more expensive as a result. There's also the side of using detection approaches that focus on identifying fraudulent tokens or cloned tokens. There's interesting approaches here like using machine learning to map uses of a token and detect if it seems feasible for an access between different areas. However, this can be very complex and very context specific. Imagine the fact that two different doors are very specific on how much time it might take to get between them. We wanted to see if we can address this in a simpler approach, but first let's talk about what RFID looks like in practice. So there's a reader component and there's a tag component. And these tags tend to be read-only passive devices that transmit their ID number when powered. There's a bunch of different protocols. The one on the left is similar to my UTID, which goes under generic HID prox, and the one on the right tag is my apartment tag, and that goes under the protocol HID H10301. But these all tend to work in similar frequencies. For example, these two work in 125 kHz. The other key component I'd like to talk about is something related, which are called rewritable tags. So T5577 cards, which were released in 2002, broadly fit in this category and are produced by Atmel, which is part of Microchip, and there are 11 blocks with 33 bits each for these cards. 1 bit is usually reserved per block for locking. Block 0 is reserved for setting the operation mode of the tag, and this lets you specify metadata like protocol, but the others can be used directly for user data. As a result, you can fit other 26-bit or even like up to 32-bit protocols into the available chip user data memory. The reason I bring these up is we designed a system called HashTag that instead of trying to focus on having the card change its value every time it outputted a new value, is written to the card every time it's read. This computation isn't really practical on the card side, since low frequency cards have minimal computational capability, but we've seen that we can use a reader that can update these values and make sure to verify a use of a token. Cards keep a constant identifier and a changing key. When the card is read, the key is compared against the expected value for that card, and if they match, access is granted, and the next value is written to the card. These values are generated with a hash chain, which ensures that future values can't be generated from a previous key. In our paper, we also go about explaining how this can be used to improve scalability and our approach to defining a way to protect it. For implementation, we used Flipper0 as a reader, which is easily programmable, as everything can be written in C. And we also use the data protocol EM4100 because of its simplicity, but others could easily plug in and play. We also use the SPH hashing library, which can also be subbed in as needed. Let's actually talk about the implementation. So you'd first see this kind of option for your screen where you're able to create new hash tags, which we call the RFID tags. You'd have the creation of a hash value, and then when it is attempted to be read, this is a successful case where the actual value matches the expected value, and it will update the card to the next hash value. However, this is a case where there is a failed read. So what actually happens is that the actual value differs from the expected, so it won't update it to the next value in the chain. Then an administrator could actually detect this situation or notify them, and then there can be an investigation of what happened. As a result, this system can help prevent and mitigate the sniffing and reuse attacks. Attackers now have a limited window in which they can use the copied card. Once the user attempts to use theirs, either the attacker's copy will become useless, or the system will become aware that there's been fraudulent activity already, and the administrator or the system can regenerate the hash to prevent further access with the fraudulent token. However, even though this isn't full protection, this can let us later on evaluate how the attacker used their fraudulent token. The system does not address relay attacks, although it can help detect their occurrence and can be complementary to other approaches to solving relay attacks or preventing them, since relay attacks are a pretty common problem in RFID systems. In terms of cost to implement, we found that rewritable cards are similar in price to static cards in bulk. They're within usually $10 when we're looking at 100. They might not be reflective of wholesale prices as a result, which could be cheaper or more expensive, but it's a good starting point. One thing is we were unsure or unable to find good examples of industry-grade reader and writers that allowed us to change functionality. We needed to provide sample or request sample quotes, but we believe that these devices could be created if a market need develops, or a specialized version of these reader writers that just focuses on updating hash values could exist. One of the main draws in RFID access systems is usually their convenience and accessibility. HashTag supports this because it doesn't require any extra effort on the user's part. They only need to hold their card against the reader slightly longer. And a feedback mechanism like a confirmation beep when done writing is useful here, and we've implemented such approach in the Flipper0. In conclusion, low-frequency RFID tags will never be perfectly secure. In fact, the biggest points of vulnerability is usually human things like piggybacking or outright theft of tokens. What we're trying to do is add an extra layer of security in an implementation that is more generalized than attempts in the past. HashTag adds an extra layer of security for RFID systems while maintaining the ease of use that RFID is known for, just making sure to add extra barriers to discourage attacks.